The morning mist clung to the city with damp fingers, but a narrow blade of sunlight always found its way to the worn green bench in Elmwood Park. It was here, at precisely 7:15 a.m., that their silent congregation took place. Arthur arrived first, as was his custom. A retired history teacher, he carried the posture of a man who had spent a lifetime at a chalkboard. He would sit on the far right, unfold his newspaper with a crisp shake, and sip his thermos of Earl Grey, his movements as measured as a metronome. Next came Isabella, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the cobblestone path. She never sat, only perched on the bench's edge, her phone a permanent extension of her hand, her voice a low, commanding murmur about quarterly reports and asset liquidity. She occupied the space next to Arthur, a storm of modern anxiety beside his antique calm. Then came Ben, his arrival signaled by the faint rustle of his worn-out jacket and the scent of fresh photocopying. A recent graduate with a degree in environmental science and a mountain of debt, he carried the weight of his unanswered job applications in the slump of his shoulders. He took the left end, scrolling through job portals with a growing sense of despair. Finally, Maria would appear, a quiet nanny pushing a stroller with a sleeping infant. She would sit in the middle, a buffer between the worlds, her gentle humming the only sound she ever made as she watched the birds. They were a constellation of separate stars, sharing a common orbit but never touching, never speaking. This was the unspoken agreement of the park bench, a shared claim to a sliver of peace. The city's notice, nailed to the ancient oak tree one Tuesday morning, shattered the agreement. It was a stark, bureaucratic proclamation on neon orange paper. Public notice, proposed redevelopment of Elmwood Park into a multi-level parking facility. Arthur was the one who pointed, his finger trembling slightly. "Well," he said, his voice rough with disuse, "that's an act of historical vandalism." The sound of his voice was so unexpected that Isabella looked up from her phone. Ben stopped scrolling. Maria's humming ceased. Isabella was the first to process it. "A parking garage?" she said, her tone dripping with contempt. "The traffic analysis alone must be flawed. This is the only green space for 10 blocks." "They can't do this," Ben whispered, his voice cracking with a passion his job applications lacked. "The soil here, the root systems, it's a miniature ecosystem." Maria simply placed a protective hand on the stroller, her dark eyes sweeping over the playground where the child she cared for would one day run. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer comfortable, it was charged. The bench, their sanctuary, had been threatened, and the threat demanded a response. It was Arthur who broke the new silence. "A petition," he declared, the teacher in him taking charge. "We need to organize, gather community support." Isabella snorted. "A petition is a wish list. We need a strategy, leverage, media attention, a compelling counterproposal." She looked at the notice, her mind already dissecting the enemy's plan. "Who's the city councilor for this district? We need to find their pressure points." Ben, emboldened by their outbursts, pulled out his laptop. I can start a social media campaign, map the biodiversity here, show people what they're really losing." All eyes turned to Maria. She looked at each of them, the stern teacher, the sharp CEO, the idealistic graduate. She spoke softly, but her words carried the weight of truth. "The families," she said. "The mothers, the nannies, the elderly who walk here every day. They do not read petitions or social media. I can talk to them." And so the Unspoken Alliance was forged. Their campaign was as chaotic as it was brilliant. Arthur, with his impeccable penmanship and respect for procedure, drafted a formal letter to the city council, citing historical preservation statutes. Isabella, using her corporate clout, secured a meeting with a skeptical city planner and presented a razor-sharp economic argument about how green spaces increase, not decrease, surrounding property values.
Ben's hashtag, #SaveElmwood, went locally viral. His photos of rare lichen and his threads about the park's old-growth trees flooded neighborhood forums. And Maria, pushing the stroller, became the campaign's soul. She collected handwritten testimonials from dozens of regulars, their simple, heartfelt stories of what the park meant to them, a place of first steps, of quiet lunches, of healing after loss.
They argued passionately. Isabella thought Arthur's methods were antiquated. Arthur thought Ben's memes were undignified. Ben thought Isabella was too willing to compromise. But Maria, always the quiet mediator, would remind them of the shared goal. "We are all looking at the same tree," she would say, "just from different sides." The climax came at the city council meeting. The chamber was packed. The developer, a slick man in an expensive suit, presented glossy renderings of the parking garage, promising progress and economic vitality. Then the Alliance took the stand. They did not speak as one, they spoke as four, a chorus of dissonant yet harmonious voices. Arthur spoke of legacy and memory, his voice echoing through the room like a professor giving his most important lesson. Isabella dismantled the developer's financial projections with cold, hard facts, exposing the long-term costs the proposal ignored. Ben, his voice shaking but clear, presented his ecological findings, showing the irreplaceable natural heritage that would be paved over. Finally, the council chair, looking weary, asked if there was anything else. Maria stepped forward. She didn't have charts or data. She simply held up the thick sheaf of testimonials. "These are not signatures on a page," she said, her voice quiet but filling the room. "These are stories. This park is not just grass and trees. It is the place where Mr. Henderson learned to walk again after his stroke. It is where Lena saw her first butterfly. It is where these people," she gestured to Arthur, Isabella, and Ben, "who had nothing in common, found a common home. You are not voting on a parking lot. You are voting on whether a city still has a heart." The vote was close, but the motion to preserve Elmwood Park passed. Weeks later, the morning ritual on the green bench resumed. But the agreement had changed. Arthur now saved a section of his newspaper for Isabella. Ben would show Maria funny animal videos on his phone to make the baby laugh. Isabella, who still took calls, would often pause to listen to one of Arthur's historical anecdotes. They had saved the park. But in doing so, they had built something far more fragile and significant, a connection. The city, in its relentless push for progress, had accidentally curated a small, perfect corner of humanity. And on a worn green bench, four strangers proved that sometimes the most powerful alliances are the ones we never saw coming.